While everyone's here, go change the account names. Mom, it's my birthday. Please stop. It's housekeeping, not drama. Do it now. 5 minutes tops. Where's the Wi-Fi? I knew the line mattered more than her smile tonight, and I promised myself the signed POA would speak when it mattered. Coffee steam lifted bittersweet while the pastry case hummed behind glass. Stay, let the documents speak first. Candles wobbled while the room sang politely and my husband clapped along. Afternoon light slid across the chalkboard, making dust sparkle above trays. He slipped between tables, opening the banking app with practiced thumbs. My mother began cutting the cake shoulders high with purpose and hurry, her knife tapping porcelain like a metronome. Nina, our server, set plates like quiet witness chairs and angled the receipt printer toward us. It ticked out a narrow strip whose timestamp would outlast this cake, this chorus, this night. I kept my purse close and found the zipper with 2 practiced fingers. A small USB lay beside a folded copy titled Durable Financial Power of Attorney above my mother's careful signature. Hold that slice for Kyle, my mother said, smiling at the nearest ant. He'll bring it back to the table, I said, almost as a wish. We do this now, she murmured, so no one can object later. The cafe, layered clinks and soft talk and coffee, smelled like Sunday mornings when life felt organized. Candle smoke drew a thin ribbon and vanished into the vent above the chalkboard menu. Counter glass reflected my face and the flicker behind me plainly. I set the receipt beneath my phone screen, waiting for sharp pings. If they deny later, the printer will not forget tonight. My palms cooled against the saucer and my jaw slowly unclenched. Before presence, read the line with the date, please, I said. Kyle reappeared, breathing through his nose, head bent toward that blue light. He hovered between my chair and the aisle, whispering, "It's simple settings, not money. No one gets hurt." Settings change rights, I said, keeping my voice level and ordinary for everyone. Rights move money, he answered like we were trading definitions from a manual. My mother lifted another plate and said, "You overcomplicate small tasks." I scanned the room and counted strangers like quiet jurors holding breath. A couple with folded church bulletins watched the candles and the barista tamped grounds while metal hissed steadily. My phone buzzed twice, banners blinking, security profile name changed and recovery email replaced. I breathed once, measured because fear wastes the first useful minute. Pause, Kyle, I said, palms open like I was landing a plane. We'll read the clause together and we'll leave with one plan. Nina tore the receipt cleanly and slid it toward me with a glance. For the candle fee, she said, ink warm digits clear, her eyes quietly asking if I agreed. Thank you, I said, letting her see I understood her timing and care. Evan's hand found my shoulder, warmth steadying my balance. We can step outside, he whispered, or hold here with witnesses. I'm staying here, I said, touching the folded POA for courage. The paper doesn't shout, but it remembers what people try to forget. My mother sighed, then arranged forks like she was fixing weather and mood. Do you want the first wish, she asked too loudly for the table. I want us to follow what we already signed, I answered simply. Tonight's about cake, not control, she said, laughter caught and scratchy. I counted backward from 3 because my jaw wanted to lock again. Calm is a practice that needs rehearsal like any honest performance worth keeping. I steadied the knife and drew one breath I could trust. Little sister, stop dramatizing, Kyle said, eyes pinned to the screen. We'll clean up labels and go home before presents, he added. Read the top line aloud, I said, the one with authority named. He shifted to block the register's light, and Evan stepped slightly left. I pictured the notary's office where the page had sounded crisp and certain. My phone buzzed again, and this time the banner blessed a relieving reversal, attempt reversed by existing authorization. A follow line recommended a meeting and requested identification with governing document copies. Tomorrow at noon, I said, we'll sit with the banker and listen. That's excessive, my mother said, slicing a piece for a watching child. It keeps the room honest, I said, and protects your care fund. The child accepted cake and forgot us, which felt like a practical blessing. Steam rose from the milk pitcher and drifted left, and I smelled school mornings and summer library air. I set the POA copy on the tablecloth with its neat border visible. The title line faced them, black on white, simple like a kitchen rule. One clause, I said, and one receipt. That's all we need tonight. My mother lowered the knife and breathed through what looked like complicated hurt. Kyle looked from Nina to the printer and then back to my waiting phone. I'll undo it later, he said, if you just stop making scenes. Scenes hide in crowds. I replied, and dates make the quiet witnesses. Evan nodded once, a yes that didn't need decoration. The wicks glowed down into dull orange and then extinguished themselves. I lifted a plate and cut a line that felt like fairness. Everyone received cake, including the couple with bulletins, and I placed a plate before my mother and slid one toward Kyle. We celebrate, I said, and we keep dignity in writing, not guessing. Fine, my mother said, resting the knife flat like a temporary truce. Tomorrow we'll hear your banker read, she added with a practiced smile. The cafe's lights faded behind us as Evan drove toward home, the steering wheel smooth under his electrician's hands. Outside, the sky hung the color of dishwater and mercy, still uncertain which it wanted to be. He didn't speak until the first red light. You want to talk now or after tea? Tea, I said, counting the seconds until green. The car smelled faintly of metal and peppermint traces from his workbench. At home, the kitchen light buzzed once before it steadied. The hum reminded me of nights balancing our parents' bills, those small digital sighs after paying for another medication refill. That's when I decided to formalize everything, no guessing, no confusion, no shifting hands. 3 years ago, after Dad's fall, I drafted a plan for their future care. I collected forms, met a notary, and paid the small fee without fuss. Mom called it unnecessary paperwork then, but she signed anyway because Kyle was late that day as usual. She liked formality until it got in her way. I brewed black tea and poured it into our old chipped mugs. The scent filled the air like morning honesty, sharp and forgiving. Evan waited while I opened the drawer with labeled folders: tax, health, POA, bank. The paper's still clear, I said. Clause 12 hasn't changed. He sipped and nodded. She knows you keep receipts. That's why she panicked. I smiled without humor. Panic sounds better than greed. We sat in silence while the clock on the oven blinked its slow insistence. Every number felt like an unpaid apology. I slid the latest bank printout toward him. The transaction attempts were gray-marked, blocked by existing authorization. My chest loosened slightly. You'll meet Miss Patel tomorrow, he asked. Noon, I confirmed. Same cafe, second branch down the street. He raised an eyebrow. Same cafe, same witnesses, I said. I don't want to rewrite the scene. I want it read properly. He smiled a small, proud smile. You do tidy revenge better than anyone. It's not revenge, I said. It's record-keeping with rhythm. A gust rattled the kitchen window. Rain started soft against the glass. The smell of wet earth mixed with leftover candle smoke from the cake box. I thought about Nina, the server, and her quick eyes noting the receipt time without being told. People like her keep the world aligned, quiet, unnoticed, vital. Before bed, I checked my phone. One new message blinked from my mother. Times. Let's not involve strangers tomorrow. We can handle this privately. Asterisk, I stared at the screen, hearing her voice soften on the word privately, a word that had never protected anyone for long. I typed one line and stopped. Then I wrote instead, Times, we'll keep it in writing, Mom. Noon as planned. Asterisk. Evan read over my shoulder and nodded. Boundaries are your new birthday gift, he said. I smiled. Best one yet. The next morning began with the smell of coffee and printer ink. Sunlight angled through blinds, striping the table like ruled paper. I laid out every folder, cross-checked each signature, and printed an extra copy of the clause to hand Miss Patel. My hand trembled once, but only from caffeine. I thought about the first time Mom praised my organization. I was 12, labeling spice jars by handwriting and alphabet. She'd said order keeps the chaos quiet. I had believed her. But maybe she meant order belongs to whoever controls it. By 10 I texted Kyle, Times, bring Mom. Noon. Branch near Elm Street. Confirmed with Patel. Asterisk. No answer. At 10:30 another message, Times, don't make a scene. Asterisk. I didn't reply. Some silences are records too. Evan packed his tools but lingered near the door. You want me there, he asked. Not this round, I said. I need to face their version alone. He kissed my forehead, scent of copper and soap clinging like proof of decent work. Then you walk out steady, he said, and you let the clause speak. I smiled, sliding the POA copy into its clear sleeve. The sound of plastic snapping shut felt like punctuation. The drive back toward Lakewood's Café Row carried a strange calm. The same bus stop, same bakery smell, same mix of people pretending afternoons mean peace. I parked and sat with hands folded on the wheel, breathing slow until my pulse synced with the ticking hazard light. Inside, the air smelled of coffee grounds and Lysol hallway freshness. The counter girl recognized me, her smile careful. "Back again already," she said. "Just keeping records consistent," I answered. She laughed lightly, not knowing how literal I was. I chose the same table. Candle wax residues still framed the center like a watermark. I set the folder there, square and visible. Miss Patel was due in 20 minutes, punctual by nature and profession. At 11:55 I saw them through the window. Mom's pale scarf first, then Kyle's fast stride. They were arguing quietly, heads close. I pretended to scroll my phone, though the reflection showed everything. "Let's just fix it before she turns this into a circus," Kyle said as they reached the door. "She's already performing," Mom whispered. "Look, even her folder has a front row seat." They sat down opposite me. Mom folded her hands like a reluctant churchgoer. Kyle kept tapping the table. "We didn't sleep," she said. "You've upset things more than you know." "Order needs proof," I said, opening the folder. "And peace needs clarity." Kyle sighed. "You're treating family like clients." "Families keep worse secrets than clients," I replied softly. The hum of the espresso machine filled the pause. Nina, again behind the counter, caught my eye briefly. Recognition, quiet and kind. Mom lowered her voice. "You think papers protect you from love's mess? They protect everyone from memory's drift," I said. She frowned. "You always were too tidy for comfort." The door chimed and Miss Patel entered, silver lanyard glinting. She nodded politely, eyes scanning for the folder before me. "Professional instincts never fail." "Shall we?" she said. Kyle muttered, "We can settle this privately." Miss Patel sat without sitting in that suggestion. "I prefer to handle signed matters in daylight," she said evenly. I breathed slow, grateful for the sentence I hadn't needed to say. "Clause 12, I said, sliding the page toward her. "Right-hand margin, second line." She read it once, lips moving slightly, then looked up. "Valid and current. You're still primary. Any unilateral change is void without co-signature." Mom's expression stayed still a moment too long, then softened. "I only wanted balance," she whispered. "Then balance is what we'll record," I said, voice low, calm, plain. Miss Patel nodded and gathered the documents neatly. "We'll note today's meeting as review complete," she said. "Any new changes require in-person consent from all parties." She placed a copy face up for each of us. Kyle leaned back, jaw tight. "So she wins again," he said. "No one wins with receipts," I answered. "We just stay accurate." He stared at me like he wanted to speak but found no synonyms for defeat. The clock above the counter clicked toward 1. Nina brought fresh water glasses and set them down with care. The sound of ice settling was the cleanest sound I'd heard all week. "Our meeting tomorrow at headquarters will confirm this record and end the doubt." That's my quiet plan, no threats, no scenes, only documentation. When I arrived at the cafe the next day, rain made the windows tremble with soft percussion. It felt less like weather and more like timing rehearsed by conscience. The neon open sign buzzed faintly above the door, spelling its honesty in flickers. Nina waved me toward the same table, her ponytail damp from errands. "You're early again," she said. "Habit," I replied, placing the folder precisely in the light. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, sharp enough to wake intentions. 5 minutes later I saw them, Mom's umbrella first, then Kyle's hurried step, trying to catch the door before it swung closed. Miss Patel followed from the corner, punctual and dry, her blazer still crisp despite the drizzle. They took seats opposite me, the same arrangement as before. No cake this time, no celebration cover story, just silence and 3 folded napkins between us. Miss Patel cleared her throat softly. "I appreciate your patience," she said. "We'll review the record, then confirm signatures." Her professionalism steadied the room better than any candle ever could. Mom smiled, small and practiced. "We're here to clarify a misunderstanding," she said. "Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic." Kyle added, "Exactly. You know how apps can glitch. Maybe the system mixed up our access." The printer behind the counter started spooling receipts. Its steady rhythm sounded like a lie detector nobody ordered. I rested my fingertips on the folder's edge, feeling the textured paper beneath, grounded in its quiet certainty. "Let's confirm one thing," Miss Patel said. "The attempted changes came from this IP address." She turned the page toward them. Kyle leaned forward. "That's not mine," he said too quickly. "It matches your phone registration," Miss Patel answered gently. Same model, same timestamp. My mother sighed. Technicalities can trap good intentions, she said. I only wanted to ensure care expenses were shared. I met her eyes. Shared access isn't denied by honesty, Mom. It's defined by it. Rain softened outside and somewhere behind the bar a spoon clinked against porcelain. I heard every small sound like punctuation in a deposition. Kyle crossed his arms. You make everything sound legal. Because it is, I said. Not emotional, documented. He scoffed, but his knee bounced under the table, betraying nerves. Mom touched his sleeve. We can still fix this quietly, she whispered. Miss Patel raised her pen, her tone patient but firm. Quiet resolutions still require signatures. That's when it happened, the shift from discomfort to denial that turns family tables into witness stands. Mom turned to me, voice clear enough for nearby customers. You're making a spectacle, Mara. We never touched your money. A few heads turned, not intrusive, just curious. The cafe air thinned. I swallowed and nodded once, choosing stillness over defense. She continued louder now. You've built this drama out of paranoia. You embarrass yourself, not us. I felt every word settle like coffee grounds, gritty and dark. Yet the calm stayed. It always does when truth carries its own timestamp. **** zoom LATED *** cafe counter chrome surface. Bright under ceiling bulbs. I slid the printed receipt forward until it touched her plate. If they deny now, the numbers will not. My pulse steadied as air pressed against my ribs. Read the time aloud, Mom. It matches your whisper. The room exhaled through the espresso hiss. She glanced down, lips tightening. Coincidence, she said. Machines don't understand context. Miss Patel leaned closer. Machines understand minutes. People create context afterward. Kyle muttered. This is ridiculous, and reached for the receipt. I covered it gently with my hand. You can have a copy, I said, but not the original. Why hoard evidence, he said. Because people forget, I replied, and paper doesn't. The couple from yesterday's table looked over briefly, then returned to their coffee. Their quiet presence felt like accountability disguised as politeness. Miss Patel summarized evenly. For the record, the authorized POA remains active, and any unapproved change will revert automatically. Mom's smile returned brittle. You sound like a courtroom. No, I said, just a family that finally reads its fine print. The rain stopped, leaving faint streaks on the glass like signatures drying in daylight. Mina approached, carrying 3 small glasses of water on a tray. Refill, she asked. Yes, please, I said. She set them down carefully. The ice shifted, catching the overhead light like witnesses remembering details. Mom sipped hers and said softly, You always have to win. I don't want victory, I said. I want consistency. You mean control. I mean accuracy. Miss Patel folded the receipt and tucked it into her folder. I'll email confirmation by end of day, she said. For now, all settings are frozen until review concludes. Kyle leaned back. So basically she owns the narrative again. No, I said. The document does. I just follow it. The tension slipped sideways, then less anger, more fatigue. Miss Patel gathered her notes, thanked us, and left her shoes clicking like metronome marks toward the door. Mom exhaled and leaned closer. This could have been a simple conversation, not an inquest. I tried conversation for years, I said. Paper was the only one listening. She closed her eyes briefly. You make me sound cruel. No, Mom, I said quietly. Just careless with dates. Her hand reached for mine halfway across the table but stopped midair. Kyle watched, waiting for a cue to end the scene. I waited too, letting time itself underline the silence. The cafe bell chimed as Miss Patel returned. Apologies, she said. Forgot one copy for your records. She handed me a sealed envelope. Kyle frowned. What's that? The audit summary, she replied. Time-stamped, initialed, ready for acknowledgement. He looked ready to argue again but saw the neat initials and thought better. Miss Patel smiled politely and left for real this time, raincoat over arm. I slipped the envelope into my bag, the weight subtle but absolute. Mom stirred her untouched water. You'll regret this distance someday, she said. Distance keeps respect measurable, I answered. She blinked, maybe hearing Dad's phrasing through me. He used to say similar things before illness made time his accountant. Nina passed behind us carrying plates, the smell of toasted bread following. It reminded me of Saturday mornings when Mom hummed over breakfast back when truth required no signatures. Kyle stood abruptly. Enough, he said. I'm not doing public theater. Then don't, I said. Just don't edit what isn't yours. He hesitated, anger cracking under weariness. You think you're better? No, I said. Just prepared. He pushed his chair back, metal scraping against tile, and left without waiting. The door closed hard behind him. My mother stayed seated, eyes on the window where her reflection replaced his. For the first time, she looked smaller than her excuses. I thought you'd thank me someday, she murmured. For keeping things simple. Simple isn't honest, I said. It's just quieter until the proof arrives. She looked down. You always loved words more than people. Words stay, I said. People forget. A long pause settled between us, neither victory nor defeat, just recognition. Outside, clouds separated, letting a gray light spread through the glass. It softened everything, the table, her face, even the folder edges. I'll sign whatever the bank wants, she said finally. Sign because it's right, I said, not because you're tired. Maybe those are the same, she whispered. I nodded. Some lessons write themselves only after repetition wears down pride. Nina brought the check, small and square. On separate tabs, she asked. Yes, Mom said quickly. That's fine, I said, smiling. Separate but correct. We paid in silence. She left first, her umbrella snapping open like a closing argument. I waited until the reflection of her scarf vanished down the street. Then I opened the envelope Miss Patel had given me. Inside lay a single page confirming all previous authorities, stamped with the date and time, 1143 a.m., exactly 1 minute before my mother's denial. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb. Cool texture, firm edge, truth on record. When I stepped outside, the rain had stopped completely. The air smelled of clean pavement and coffee, and the quiet felt earned rather than forced. I looked once at the cafe window. My faint reflection nodded back, tired, steady, unafraid. Tomorrow would bring consequences, but tonight the evidence had spoken. The house felt hollow when I returned, like sound itself had packed up and left. Evan looked up from the workbench in the garage, safety glasses still perched on his head. The smell of copper and sawdust drifted through the doorway. How bad? He asked. Not loud, I said. Just final. He wiped his hands on a towel, careful not to stain the floor. That's your version of an explosion. I laughed, once thin and tired. She denied everything, even with the timestamp right there. He tilted his head. She'll process it later. Truth takes longer for people who avoid it. We stood in the quiet, letting the whir of the ceiling fan fill the space where words could start arguments. I wanted to tell him every line, but exhaustion makes even victory sound heavy. In the kitchen, the air smelled of reheated soup and the faint Lysol I'd sprayed before leaving that morning. I poured water, the glass cool against my palms, and watched light shift through it onto the counter. He followed, leaning against the fridge. Did Patel hold firm, unshakable? I said. She froze the accounts and documented every word. That's your kind of poetry. Boundaries with punctuation, I said, smiling despite myself. I pulled the folder from my bag. The edges were damp from humidity and nerves. Inside, the receipt and audit summary rested like proof that sanity could be notarized. I spread them on the table, smoothing wrinkles with my fingertips. Evan sat opposite, his arms folded loosely. So what now? Tomorrow Patel runs the audit through headquarters. I'll compile a timeline tonight. He nodded. You'll sleep after that, maybe, I said. Paper first, piece later. I opened my laptop. The hum of the fan joined the ticking wall clock, steady and impartial. I began typing each event: whisper, transfer, attempt, reversal, alert, cafe, confrontation. Dates aligned like fence posts, small ordinary boundaries, exactly enough. Halfway through, guilt pricked the calm. I pictured Mom's face at the cafe window, smaller than her voice. I whispered to the screen she thought control meant love. Evan heard but didn't interrupt. He finally said, "You kept her from a worse mistake." Maybe, I replied. But she'll remember only the embarrassment. Let her, he said. Memory corrects itself when it runs out of excuses. The scent of rain still clung to my hair. I could taste the city's metallic air. I typed slower, letting each keystroke anchor my pulse. The file title: account change, timeline. Docs looked both clinical and personal. When the list reached midnight yesterday, I paused. I wrote one final line times. Meeting concluded, no shouting truth on record. Asterisk. The act of typing it felt like sealing a wound. Evan placed a mug beside me. Chamomile, he said. The steam curled between us, soft and forgiving. I thought you'd make coffee, I teased. You don't need alertness, you need landing gear. He was right. The tea tasted like quiet understanding. I closed the folder and leaned back, feeling the chair creak like an old ally. Did she sign anything yet? He asked. Not yet. She said she would. Maybe guilt will wake first. Or pride will sleep in, he said, half smiling. I looked around our small kitchen, the hum of the fridge, the faint glow from the microwave clock, the smell of fresh tea. All ordinary proofs of stability. That's what betrayal steals first, the ordinary. When he went to shower, I printed 2 extra copies of the summary and slid them into envelopes. One for Patel, one for my safe box. The printer's soft groan matched the day's fatigue. I stacked everything neatly, then sat on the floor beside the table. Cool tile against my bare feet steadied me. The silence pressed gently, not accusing, just present. In that stillness, memory rewound itself. Dad's voice reading bills aloud to keep transparency honest. Mom humming while I filled out his insurance forms. Kyle promising to help someday. Someday never came, but signatures did. A gust outside rattled the window again. I smelled damp soil, the same earthy breath from childhood summers. Nostalgia tried to soften anger, but truth held shape. Evan returned, hair damp, t-shirt clean. You look like someone halfway through an exam. Grading my own answers, I said. Passing, with revisions. He knelt beside me, hand brushing my shoulder. You know, most people never stand up in those moments. You did it calmly with witnesses and left dignity intact. That's not paperwork, that's courage. I blinked hard. Tears didn't fit tonight's theme. I didn't feel brave. Just prepared. Preparation is bravery you can measure, he said. You've been building it for years. We sat there, the fan tracing circles above. The room smelled of rain fading and warm paper. I realized this valley, this pause between confrontation and resolution, wasn't emptiness, it was confirmation. Tomorrow, I said, Patel will finalize the audit. And then I'll write Mom. Not to argue, just to share the finalized clause. He nodded. That's the high road. No, I said. It's the signed road. He laughed quietly, leaning his head against the wall. You'll make poets out of accountants. The clock showed 10. I gathered the pages into a single manila envelope, pressed the flap and ran my thumb along the glue until it sealed clean. The sound was small but complete. All right, he said. Lights soon, 10 minutes. He kissed my forehead and left me with the ticking. I reread the timeline once more, scanning for missed details. None. Every entry balanced cause and effect like ledger lines. My breath slowed to match the rhythm. At the bottom margin, I added one personal note for myself times. Accuracy is compassion for the future. Asterisk. It wasn't poetry, but it was true. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, then quieted. The night folded itself into softer silence. I switched off the kitchen light, leaving the glow from the hallway bulb to guard the papers. In bed, Evan's breathing steadied beside me. I stared at the ceiling, counting invisible dots in the plaster until sleep took shape. Between thoughts, I saw Mom's face again, not angry, just lost in a world where intentions replaced evidence. Some part of me still wished she'd called before acting just once. But people who equate control with care rarely ask. They announce. And then they blame the echo. Before drifting off, I whispered into the dark, tomorrow we finish it. No noise, no new wounds. The words settled softly, part prayer, part promise. The night's last sound was the mantel clock ticking toward midnight, impartial and kind. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table, bright enough to show every crease on the documents. The air smelled of reheated coffee and a thin trace of printer toner. I pressed the power button on the laptop, waiting for the hum to level. Each folder opened like a small courtroom. POA receipts and the bank's security emails, each one carried my signature and the faint promise that order could stay intact. I scrolled through Miss Patel's overnight message, Times audit scheduled noon today. Bring originals for clause verification. Asterisk. The printer clicked to life, steady and loyal. Pages fed through their rhythm, calmer than yesterday's voices. Evan stood beside me, tying his boots for a service call. You sure you don't want company? He asked. I'll be fine, I said. It's just paper, not confrontation. Paper's heavier than people sometimes, he said, grinning. Then he left with the smell of cold metal and soap trailing behind. I read the clause again line by line. Asterisk clause 12. All financial authority remains with designated agent until revoked by written consent of both principals. Asterisk, the words had weight, measured, impartial, stronger than memory's improvisation. I whispered them aloud once, the way a person rehearses courage. Next came the timestamps. I opened the bank log showing times, attempted change 1144 a.m. Asterisk and times audit confirmed 1143 a.m. Asterisk 1 minute difference, 1 quiet salvation. I screenshotted the sequence and printed it for good measure. The room smelled faintly of rain again. The forecast matched the tension outside. I touched the corner of the folder, cool and smoothed the texture of discipline. On impulse I added one sticky note, times. Truth is punctual, asterisk. By mid-morning I slipped everything into my canvas bag, USB drive, signed POA audit printouts and Nina's receipt from the cafe. Each item was light alone, heavy together. The zipper closed with a short metallic sigh. Before leaving I placed a copy of the timeline in the kitchen drawer labeled times for reference. Asterisk. It wasn't paranoia, just documentation, a form of love written in advance. I stood by the window and watched clouds stretch above the street, gray folding into silver. Somewhere out there Mom was probably rehearsing her apology or her defense. Either way, the paper would speak first. The fridge hummed steady as breath. I straightened my jacket, slid the envelope under my arm and locked the door. My pulse matched the ticking clock behind me, calm, deliberate, on schedule. Today wouldn't change the past, but it would define it on record. That was enough. The branch smelled of polished wood and faint cologne, a weekday seriousness that made every whisper feel recorded. Miss Patel met me in the lobby with her usual calm. "We'll keep it brief," she said. "Accuracy doesn't need drama." I followed her through the glass door into the small meeting room where sunlight cut neat squares across the table. Mom sat, already scarf perfectly arranged, Kyle beside her scrolling his phone. I set the folder down, its weight landing louder than any greeting. "Thank you for coming," Miss Patel began. "We'll finalize yesterday's findings." Kyle looked up. "We just want fairness." "Fairness is what records provide," she replied, sliding a printed report toward us. She pointed to the top line, Times audit summary. Authorized agent Mara Ellis. Asterisk. Mom adjusted her scarf. "That paper doesn't capture intention. It captures consent," I said. "Which is the measurable version of intention." The room's air conditioning hummed steady as a heartbeat. Miss Patel opened the POA copy, the edges newly embossed from verification. Clause 12, she read, voice even. "Authority remains until both principals revoke it in writing. No such revocation exists." She placed the page flat in front of my mother. Mom's fingers trembled once, then smoothed the paper as if affection could edit ink. "I never meant harm," she whispered. "I know," I said. "But harm doesn't wait for intention either." Kyle leaned forward. "Couldn't we just share access?" "Two names again, dual signatures can be added," Miss Patel said, "but not without this agent's consent." I met his eyes. "I'll allow view rights, not changes. That's balance." He exhaled, half acceptance, half surrender. Outside the door, the faint clatter of keyboards carried like distant rain. Miss Patel signed the final line, stamped the page and handed each of us a copy. The scent of fresh ink mingled with the office's recycled air. "Everything is restored," she said. "Your father's fund and care account are secure. Any further edits require in-person verification." Mom nodded slowly, eyes glassy but calm. "You learned that steadiness from him," she murmured. "From both of you," I said. "But I wrote it down." Miss Patel smiled faintly. "Documentation is a form of peacekeeping." She gathered her files and stood. "Congratulations, closure in real time." As she left, silence settled between us, softer than yesterday's rain. Kyle tucked his phone away. Mom reached for her copy, folding it once before slipping it into her purse. "I suppose that's that," she said. "Yes," I answered. "On paper and in memory." When we walked out together, the lobby lights glinted off the stamped seal in my folder. Proof didn't shout. It breathed quietly, one line at a time. That evening the sky turned the color of old silverware, dull but forgiving. I drove home with the folder beside me, its stamped seal catching every passing streetlight. Proof felt heavier in victory than in doubt. Evan opened the door before I reached for the handle. How'd it go? Done, I said. Signed, sealed, and maybe understood. He smiled carefully. Maybe understanding takes longer than signatures. The living room smelled of sawdust from his repairs and the faint citrus cleaner he liked. I placed the folder on the coffee table and the sound echoed just enough to feel official. She looked smaller today, I said. Like the fight left early. She'll recover, he answered. Mothers rebuild pride faster than trust. I nodded, leaning back against the couch. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second polite enough to wait its turn. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 lines times new terms. Dual view rights, shared reports monthly, *. My handwriting looked steadier than my heart. Evan sat beside me, shoulder warm against mine. That's fair, he said. Fair isn't forgiveness, I replied. It's maintenance. He chuckled softly. Maintenance suits you better than revenge. I'm tired of anger that doesn't pay bills, I said. Boundaries do. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed rhythmically, reminding me of summers before money became vocabulary for love. I closed my eyes and listened. The sound was mechanical yet strangely merciful. When I looked again, the house seemed smaller, quieter, owned by intention rather than apology. I opened the folder once more, touched the embossed seal, and thought of Dad, how he'd pause before signing anything, making sure truth had time to breathe. I whispered, "It's done, Dad." The paper spoke. Evan heard and stayed silent. Some victories don't need translation. Later we ate dinner in easy silence, the kind earned after storms. He reached for my hand halfway through, grounding me to the table's smooth grain. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the room, warm and human. I'll send Patel a thank you note tomorrow, I said. She'll frame it, he replied. She should frame the timestamp instead, I said, smiling. After dishes, I filed every document in the cabinet under times completed cases. It wasn't law, but it was justice enough for one family. The folders lined up neatly, paper edges straight as boundaries finally respected. Before bed, I stood by the window watching porch lights blink on across the street. Each glow felt like an acknowledgement, quiet, steady, deserved. Mom would need time. Kyle would avoid time. I would honor it. And when the night settled deep, I whispered the truth I'd earned. Peace begins on record. A week later, I returned to the cafe, same corner table, same hum of the espresso machine. The air smelled of roasted beans and faint rain through the open door. I placed my coffee on the napkin ringed with yesterday's newsprint and waited for quiet to settle. Nina recognized me instantly. Back for another audit, she joked. Something like that, I said. Less paper this time. She smiled, refilling the sugar jar. Then it'll go smoother. The bell over the door chimed. I looked up and saw my mother hesitant in the doorway, scarf loose around her neck. She spotted me and walked over slowly, no performance left, just gravity. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said. I wasn't sure either, she answered, voice softer than I remembered. We sat facing each other, steam curling between us. The memory of that first whisper still floated somewhere in the air, but its sharpness had dulled. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. For you, she said. Inside was a check, not large, just symbolic, with the memo line reading Times Joint Care Fund reconciled. I canceled the old transfer plans, she said. You were right. It wasn't about control, it was about fear. Getting older makes people grasp at handles that aren't theirs. I folded the check carefully. Thank you, I said. Fear's human. Paper just keeps it honest. She nodded. Kyle's quiet lately. Maybe embarrassed, maybe thinking. Either way, silence is progress. Progress counts, I said. Nina brought 2 fresh coffees, setting them down with her steady grace. On the house, she said. You two look like you're writing endings. More like acknowledgements, I replied. Mom laughed softly, genuine this time. You've turned everything into a ledger. Balance sheets of peace, I said, smiling. We talked about small things, Dad's favorite recipes, the neighborhood trees, a TV show she thought I'd like. The words had no sharp corners anymore. Before leaving, she touched my wrist lightly. You kept dignity even when I didn't deserve it. That's what I'll remember. You gave me the structure to do it, I said. I just used it differently. Outside, sunlight broke through clouds, hitting the wet pavement in long, forgiving lines. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the city's mix of coffee and damp concrete. The folder in my bag stayed closed. It had finished speaking. Behind me the cafe door swung shut and its soft click sounded like punctuation, final but gentle. I didn't need proof anymore. I had closure. As I walked home I thought of one line to keep forever: documents restore order but mercy restores family. I've learned that peace doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives with paperwork, patience, and the willingness to listen even when you're right. The cafe scene plays in my head, sometimes not as humiliation but as a reminder that boundaries are acts of care, not defiance. When I was younger I believed families fixed everything with forgiveness alone. I thought love automatically meant trust. But life taught me that trust without structure becomes confusion dressed as generosity. It asks people to read intentions instead of agreements, and that's how resentment grows quietly, like mold beneath paint. The power of attorney was never about control. It was a promise made in ink, not emotion, that someone would stay steady when fear made others frantic. When Mom panicked and told Kyle to change the names, it wasn't pure betrayal. It was fear of being irrelevant. She wanted proof she still mattered, even if it meant rearranging signatures. I understand that now, even if I can't excuse it. In every family there's a moment when words stop being enough. That's when documentation becomes compassion. It removes guessing and saves people from their own forgetfulness. Some call it cold, I call it merciful. Since the audit closed, the house has been quieter. Mom calls every Sunday again, her tone lighter, her pauses shorter. Kyle hasn't spoken much, but he sent me a picture of Dad's old toolbox with the caption "Times still works." Maybe that's his version of an apology. Maybe it's enough. Sometimes I open the folder just to see the seal's faint shimmer under light. It reminds me that clarity doesn't erase love, it defines its perimeter. If we truly want peace with others, we need to give peace a form to live inside: a date, a clause, a boundary, something tangible that memory can't distort. I think about other families sitting in kitchens tonight arguing over inheritance bills or who's in charge. I hope someone there decides to put it in writing before the shouting starts. That one action could spare them months of silence. When we say let the paper speak, we're really saying let the truth be visible so love doesn't have to shout. That's the real education this story gave me. Dignity isn't won in public. It's maintained in private with calm steps and signed pages. And forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's learning how to remember without reopening the wound. If you've ever been through a moment where fairness felt lonely, know this: quiet justice still counts. It just takes longer to be noticed. Keep your records, keep your boundaries, and keep your kindness. They can coexist. Before I end, I want to thank everyone who listened to this story all the way through. Stories like this one aren't just about one family, they're about how all of us learn to stay human when money, power, and pride collide. If this story made you think about your own boundaries or helped you breathe a little easier, I invite you to stay with us. Listen to more stories where ordinary people face extraordinary truths right here on ****en Reddit story ****. Subscribe for the next chapter of Quiet Justice and visit our playlist Times, Inheritance and Family Lessons. Times to hear other tales where documents speak and dignity finally answers.